Treeford Records presents the Highbrow Players in My Mythological Narrative. This episode is entitled Intro Origin. The Highbrow Players are Robert Crenshaw, Don Dixon, Marty Jones, Don Jones, Jill Bartlett, Steve Karras, Graham Mabey, Mitchell Crenshaw, Leah Crenshaw, Jamie Hoover, and Michael Datz.
An old guy in an old car drives along the expressway, traveling out of town for work. He's racked up a lot of miles on the road in his life, seen a lot of the country. Recently, he's been teaching skilled trade people in manufacturing about robots.
A human being can move his or her wrist, elbow, and shoulder in combinations to make path-oriented motions like drawing or painting. And sometimes they make point-to-point motion like moving a fork to a plate, filling it with food, then carrying it to their mouth to eat. An industrial robot can make those same types of path-oriented and point-to-point motions. Human beings make specific types of motions unconsciously when conditions motivate them to. Robots perform various types of motions in a program when specific conditions and requirements are met.
Sometimes a journey along a path is required. Sometimes you just have to get where you're going. On a long road trip, sometimes the driver's seat of a car becomes a kind of time machine as he stares at the road, staying present enough to pay attention, but flashing in and out, dreaming of the moments of yesterdays and visions of the future. Sometimes with regret, occasional anxiety, and sometimes with a smile in the warmth and peace of the moment. Memory is funny. I heard someone say recently that every time you remember something and bring another detail into the picture, the farther away from reality you may be pushing the memory. Most people's brains are better at painting pictures than recalling pictures. Reality, in many ways, is about perception, and even if seeing is believing, it is through the eyes of the beholder, under the conditions of specific colors of light, at very specific angles. As far as dreams and memories, it doesn't matter so much if something's a little off. It can't be helped. There's always error. It's the old man in the car's perception through his filters. It's his dream, his head, that make up his world. The dreams and narratives in his head are a big part of the frames that construct the walls of his life, his moral boundaries, his potential for exploration and discovery, his moral compass. These walls define and support the ever-present dream he perceives to be reality. In many ways, everyone's life is just a series of smoky dreams in a time machine. Sure, we try to be objective, but we are much more driven by the emotions in the ancient layers deep in our brains than our rational mind. It's just how we're wired. It's how we survive. The old man does his best. It's all anyone can do. Once in a while, he thinks about all the events in his life that have led to a moment. The things that shaped his childhood, the times when he turned right instead of left, the socioeconomics and politics of his environment growing up, until now. There have been a lot of twists and turns along the road, a lot of reinvention and resurrection. The world, in so many ways, has been charitable in kind. At this stage in his life, the old man is pretty thankful. Everyone has mythological narratives about the things that have happened in their lives. Sometimes you're the good guy, the bad guy. Most of the best dreams and narratives have joy, sorrow, love, and regret. That's what makes them so real. At their best, dreams and narratives can help to make a life whole. At their worst, one can stigmatize themselves into a self-loathing trap. Most people want to be able to look back at their lives and say they gave more than they took. But the truth is, it's always going to boil down to who gets asked about it on what day. Shit.
Now here's something we hope you really like.
New from Bonco.
Did you hear about Bill next door?
No. Is he all right?
He's really changed. Everyone's afraid of him. The executives at work promoted him to supervisor. My supervisor.
I wonder if he's taking that new drug, Asholia.
Asholia relaxes the frontal cortex to release you from the bonds of impulse control and social behavior while stimulating the brain's amygdalas, freeing you to express your fear, anxiety, and rage, both verbally and physically.
I'm home.
How was your day? How do you feel?
I feel great. How about you shutting the up?
With Asholia, you can be the person you've always wanted to be. Maybe even president.
At Bonco Pharmaceuticals, we sell stuff. Sometimes crazy stuff.
And now, back to our show.
I once heard an interview with Irma Bombeck where she said that throughout her childhood and early adult life, she thought that the world was made up of two kinds of people, the young and the old, and she didn't even really like those old people. As she matured, though, she naturally realized that this wasn't the case, and at first she was pretty miffed about the whole idea. How could it happen, me becoming one of those old people? I'm pretty sure that anyone who lives long enough has that moment. If you're lucky, though, you learn to buckle up, take a deep breath, and enjoy the ride. I was born 13 years and 1 day after VE Day, when Germany surrendered and people around the world celebrated the end of World War II. It's funny though, because when you're a kid, 13 years is an eternity, but when you get older, 13 years is a blink of an eye. I'm not the first to recognize that many of the conditions in my life existed as a result of World War II. The socio-economic conditions of benefiting from living in an industrial mecca, the remnants of a culture of collectivism and community as people went through the shared experience of war, where most of the adults in my neighborhood had skin in the game. When we played Army, we played World War II, and as far as we knew, America had won that war, and we lived in the greatest country on earth. Other than the slavery thing and the Indian thing and some other things, we were pillars of justice and meritocracy. I have some pictures in my mind of a house where we lived in Jackson, Michigan around 1960-61 because that's where I broke my leg the first time. But most of my early memories and smoky childhood dreams are in a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house on a street called Phillips in a suburb of Detroit, Michigan called Berkeley, and on another house just around the block on Oakshire. My mom grew up in Berkeley and had 2 sisters who lived in town. My Aunt Flo had 2 daughters, and my Aunt Rudy had 2 daughters and 4 sons. All this meant that I had cousins to play with early on in my life, and that we had family cookouts and celebrated holidays together in rooms full of people that we were and felt connected to. We also had relatives on my father's side of the family in and around Flint, Michigan, that we saw and were connected to and celebrated holidays with. My mom was born in a house on Phillips, less than half a mile from 2648 Phillips, where I grew up. She was the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter, which according to Scottish folklore gives her the gift of second sight or prophetic vision. She does have some interesting stories along those lines from when she was a kid, and until about 90, she wrote and directed plays for a theater group she started after she retired. She does have some special mojo for sure. In her professional life, she graduated from Wayne State University in Detroit with a master's degree in education and taught in public schools for more than 30 years. My dad Howard passed away a few years back. He grew up in Flint in the 1930s and 40s. I'm pretty sure it was safe to drink the water back then. He joined the Navy when he was 17 and was one of the kids that they put on the decks of ships while testing nuclear devices at Bikini Atoll. He graduated from Michigan State thanks to the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, also known as the GI Bill. Mom and Dad probably got their first mortgage through that as well. My dad worked in city government when I was a kid. He was the assistant city manager of the town next to ours, Huntington Woods, for some time during the 1960s, and we got to take swimming lessons in the pool over there one summer. Later, he became city manager of Berkeley, and we got our own dang pool. Eventually, he ended up working and retiring from Mount Sinai Hospital in Detroit. I can happily say that my life never lacked for love or material goods. We faced the same crazy shit that every family had to deal with during the 1960s and 70s, but generally speaking, we had a stable and loving home. I do have one, at least, kind of funny memory from when I was a kid on Phillips. At different times, I shared different bedrooms with my various brothers. One night, John and Mitchell must have been in the faux antique bunk beds in the little bedroom, and Marshall and I in the oak twin beds in another. I was wakened in the middle of the night by Marshall talking in his sleep. He sounded upset, and it scared me. It must have been blowing pretty good outside, because the moonlight danced on the walls as the wind passed through the swaying trees, just like it does in every scary little kid story. I imagined all kinds of shapes and faces in the dim light. Long-drawn faces with bulging eyes and big sharp teeth. Wicked Witch of the West looking faces with piercing scary laughs. I also noticed a distinct rise in the ambient noise as the wind gusted like crashing waves during a full moon swell. I distinctly remember wanting to see my mommy. As I listened, I heard a voice. I thought I heard a voice, a woman's voice, but it wasn't my mom. As I looked for the source of the sound, I noticed something on the north bedroom wall, close to the door where there could have been a picture. It was a vaguely oval-shaped patch of light that almost looked like a faint orange flame. It seemed like the voice was coming from the oval light. Oddly enough, though, the voice was soothing and I wasn't afraid.
Everything is all right. Don't be afraid. Shh. Close your eyes and be still. Sleep, little one. Everything is gonna be all right. Shh.
I know it sounds crazy, and it must have been a dream, but it seemed very real. I remember asking my mom about it in the morning, and she said that it was just a dream. But everything about the experience seemed so vivid, and I remember at the time my little kid brain wondering, what was that? That wasn't a dream. My wife Tammy loves that story. She said it must have been my guardian angel. I don't know about all that, but sometimes I have found comfort in the message that I was okay and that everything would be all right. I have 3 brothers. In chronological order, they are Marshall, who was born in 1953, Mitchell in 56, and John in 61. On November 22nd, 1963, I was in kindergarten and had a half day of school. My cousin Marilyn was taking care of us because Mom had gone to see Marshall in a play at Angel Elementary School. Marilyn had a little red transistor radio with a light brown leather case. I remember she was standing at the sink doing dishes and we were listening to music on the little radio. Then, the music must have been interrupted because I heard the news come on the radio and something seemed different. Marilyn was one of my Aunt Flo's daughters and was probably 19 at the time. She was one of our cool cousins who liked rock and roll and sometimes took care of us. I don't remember her being noticeably upset, but I knew something was wrong when she turned down the radio and told me to go outside and play in the front yard, which I did. I don't remember being out there for too long before Mitchell, Marshall, and my mom came home. President Kennedy had been killed. I, of course, didn't have any rational way to process it. Shit, I was just a little kid. I guess no one had a rational way to process it. The president had been killed. I imagine a big chunk of the world lost its sense of stability for a moment. Most of my memories of the Kennedy assassination are of an interrupted television schedule with wall-to-wall news and no cartoons for kids. My folks had a big black and white television set in the downstairs bedroom, and I remember seeing clips of the funeral procession and shots of John Kennedy in a little suit looking brave and regal. I just knew that it was a bad thing and that it had made a lot of people sad, especially the president's family and his wife. Everyone seemed to love the Kennedys, or at least I thought they did. If my parents were scared, though, I didn't pick up on it. After that, the world changed. I remember a couple of years later when Johnson was president, Marshall had a big poster of a drawing of Lyndon Johnson on a crazy-looking motorcycle. Hey, hey, LBJ, it said. And I don't think that it was supposed to be flattering. Actually, it was part of a longer chant. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? After Kennedy, it always seemed like the president was standing in hot water. After the Kennedy assassination, it seemed like bad things were always happening on the news. Many years later, I heard Marshall tell a story of the day of the assassination. He said that he and his classmates were putting on a play when suddenly the principal of the school came out looking upset, walked on stage and stopped the play. All the children in the play were sent off stage, probably to the teacher's lounge behind the stage, and the principal talked to the audience. After that, everyone was sad, and people were crying. Marshall's first thought was that the play had been so bad that the principal stopped the show and gave it the hook. Poor little guy. After I originally wrote this book, Marshall said he didn't know where I got that story, but it wasn't from him. I must have dreamed it, but I'm not really capable of making something up that specific. I can't imagine, but I do know I would never let something as boring as the truth get in the way of good storytelling. Sometimes the way you remember things just didn't really happen. I'm not the only person to come to this conclusion, but one day it dawned on me that there was a connection between the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November of '63 and the Beatles' first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in February of 1964. The connection goes like this. After the Kennedy assassination, there was a kind of a tension, like when the drawstring of a bow is pulled back to its maximum displacement. When released, it's going to have the impact of most of its potential energy. I think the Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, for many people, especially kids, was that kind of release, or at least a partial release. I think people needed a joyful distraction, and at approximately 8:12 on February 9th, that tension was released and that joyful arrow flew For millions of people, young and old, it was suddenly okay to be silly and sing along with these four amazingly interesting creatures from across the sea. After the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, almost all of my memories of the house on Phillips involved music. On Sunday or Saturday afternoon, our dad would sometimes take us to different music stores to look at instruments. Fender and Vox amps were always a fave. Any type of shining drums that would set me dreaming. Guitars, basses, and an occasional electric sitar couldn't help but to stir the imagination. When I was in the first grade, I got a small Slingerland snare drum for Christmas. When I was 7, my dad bought me an old Slingerland drum set, probably a Radio King, from a guy down the street for $10. And in 1967, when I turned 9, I got a red sparkle set of tricks on drums. I think I started begging for a full kit when I got the first snare drum. Dad probably said something like, "You'll have to wait until you're 9," probably thinking that I would lose interest. I did not.
Time for a musical interlude. Take it away.
All around this old town, you are the news that's going round. Everyone's in love with you. Everyone's in love with you. My friends and I were in a world. We're all obsessing with the very same girl. Everyone's in love with you. Everyone's in love with you. Now I suppose that I have got to try to outlast all the other guys. And I've got my hopes up high. That's enough to pick up their pieces and say goodbye. We're all wondering what to do. Everyone's in love with you. Everyone's in love with you. Everyone's in love with you. Now I suppose that I have got to try to outlast all the other guys. And I've got my hopes up high. That's enough to pick up their pieces and say goodbye. We're all wondering what to do. Everyone's in love with you. You know we're all wondering what to do. To be the first to get next to you. Everyone's in love with you. Everyone's in love with you. It's too crazy to be true. But everyone's in love with you. It's just too crazy to be true. Everyone's in love with you. And we're all wondering what to do. Me and everyone in love with you. It's just too crazy to be true. But everyone's in love with you. And we're all wondering what to do. Me and everyone in love with you. Everyone's in love with you.
There were a lot of good music stores in the area back then. 4 in Royal Oak alone. Some of my faves were Sparks Music on 6th Street, Grinnell's Music on Washington, and Royal Music on Main. My tricks on drums came from Royal Music. Sparks Music had guitars and drums, but they also had Thomas and Lowry organs. Grinnell's, or more correctly, Grinnell Brothers, had pianos, organs, and some more exotic brands of guitars. But for some reason, the only kind of amps I can remember there were Baldwin amps that had these funny colored buttons on them. Later, when I was a teenager, I would find out that there was also a great store in 8 Mile in Warren called Gus Zappi's. Gus Zappi was from Castelfidardo, Italy, and he had built an accordion factory in Hamtramck, Michigan in the 1930s. There was always a lot of accordions in music stores back then. In the 70s, Gus's son ran the store. One of my favorite times at Zappi's is when a guy from ARP came in to demonstrate the ARP 2600 synthesizer. At the time, I was amazed by all the sounds that could be made on it. I imagine, as far as analog synthesizers go, it's probably still a sought-after staple. Gus Zappi's got a big bunch of Vox amps in one time. Super Beatles, Buckinghams, AC-30s. Marshall's band bought a bunch of them. It was really cool. Marshall took piano lessons from a guy named James Caldwell, first at Sparks, then at Royal. I took piano lessons from a woman at Sparks. I never learned to read music very well, but I learned a little bit about chords and music theory. I used to memorize the piece of music she wanted me to learn by listening to her play it. Then I would go home and learn to play it by ear. Not exactly what she was trying to teach, but a good skill nonetheless. I also took a few piano lessons from Caldwell, and a woman named Mrs. Sullivan after that, who was a music teacher at our elementary school. We had very supportive parents. We used to spend a lot of time at Royal Music, I suppose because of the lessons. There was a room that had racks of sheet music in it, and I remember being with Mitchell leafing through the racks looking for cool and funny stuff while waiting for Marshall to come out of his lessons. After a few times of rifling through the bins, the number one standout record for us kids was the Fugs' first album from 1965 and the Fugs from '66, both those albums on ESP Records. I remember looking at the LP's covers and the titles of the songs and reading the liner notes. For a 9 or 10-year-old kid, a whole new vocabulary and genre entered a new frame for music. Counterculture, with titles like I Feel Like Homemade Shit and Dirty Old Man. It was years later when I actually got to listen to those records. For a while, when I was in my 20s, I used to go running around Central Park Reservoir, sometimes Washington Square, listening to those records on my Sony Walkman. I totally fell in love with them. These days, I consider them some of the finest records ever made. Lyrics written by deep-thinking, honest people with fine, thrifty arrangements. They still sound great. Another standout record was Contact High by the Gods, also on ESP. There was a quote in the liner notes that read something like, "If you don't like the Gods, well, goddamn you." At 9 or 10 in 1968, those were powerful words. They also had the Herb Alpert album, Whipped Cream and Other Delights, the one with the whipped cream lady on it. That was our favorite album cover for sure.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
New from Bonco.
These pants are too tight. Have you been washing them in hot water?
No, it looks like you've gained a little weight. You need to talk to your doctor. Tell him you need some Velitas.
Velitas is made from the essence of durian, whose olfactory qualities have been compared to rotting onions, turpentine, raw sewage, stale vomit, used surgical swabs, and gym socks, suppressing the appetite and giving you a healthy glow.
Did you poop in my food?
No, it's Velitas. You look better already.
Durian and Velitas have both been banned in public places and hotels in Singapore and Malaysia and may not be given to children.
At Bonco Pharmaceuticals, we sell stuff. Sometimes crazy stuff.
Let's catch up with Robert and the gang.
I was too young to remember this, but in 1960-61, when we lived in Jackson, Michigan, our parents would kind of bribe us to go to church and say that after church we could go to a music store and look in the windows at the instruments if we were good. My mom laughed as she told me a story that one time my brother Mitchell and I got into a slapping, pushing fight during Mass and caused a scene. No music store that day. No music stores for bad little boys. The sensory immersion of a movie theater can usually invoke a deeper emotional response than TV. I think about the love, lust, empathy, sympathy, fear, and distrust I felt for characters in movies growing up. In our area, we sometimes went to the Royal Oak, Washington, Maine, and Birmingham theaters, and sometimes the Oak Drive-In. But we usually went to the Berkeley Theater on West 12 Mile Road in the heart of Berkeley. I would sometimes call Lincoln 20330 and hear this sound.
This is the Berkeley Theater, located on West 12 Mile Road in the heart of Berkeley. Now showing Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman and George Kennedy. Also showing in our double feature, In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier and Robert Steiger. Showtimes at 7 p.m. in our air-conditioned theater. Always plenty of parking in the back.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I've always liked movies, and I went to the show as often as possible as a kid. The closest movie house was the Berkeley Theater, so that's where we mostly went. Again, Robert was my main partner here. My dad took us sometimes too. I remember seeing Elvis in Viva Las Vegas, John Wayne in The War Wagon, James Bond in Dr. No and Goldfinger, and scary movies like The Old Dark House.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy.
I remember seeing people lined up in the hundreds to see Hard Day's Night. The movies had a big effect on me. I remember a scene in Hard Day's Night where the Beatles are riding along in a train car and singing I Should Have Known Better, and thinking to myself, this is for me. At the time, my impatience stopped me from actually learning how to play anything, but I'd found my tribe. War movies were a big favorite too. I remember seeing Von Ryan's Express with Frank Sinatra more than once during its run at the Berkeley and thinking it was the ultimate in movie-making art.
The show starts in 4 minutes.
I also have some great memories of the Berkeley, as we called it. I recall tagging along with Marshall and some of his friends to see The Old Dark House. The Old Dark House was released in 1963 and was directed by William Castle. Castle also made House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler, Homicidal, Dr. Sardonicus, Straitjacket, I Saw What You Did, and Rosemary's Baby. He had a long and storied career and was the master at scaring the bejeebus out of almost everybody. The Old Dark House's premise is of a last will and testament of a grandparent of a family of 7 named the Femmes that leaves a fortune to the last one standing in the family. Nice guy. Under the terms of the will, each of the relatives is required to return to the dilapidated mansion before midnight every evening or forfeit his or her share of the family fortune. Nice guy. During the course of one dark and stormy night, one of the Femme family dies every hour. The first is Agatha Femme, Casper's mother. Up until this scene, there was some scary music, thunder and lightning, and a bit of mystery lurking in the dark shadows of a classic black and white British horror movie, but nothing prepared me for what was to come next. Agatha was a smiling woman and matriarch of the family, played by Joyce Irene Greenfield. When she's discovered, eyes wide open and smiling with her knitting needles stuck through her neck, my 5 or 6 year old heart nearly leaped out of my chest. We were seated at the bottom of the theater, just a few rows from the screen. I jumped out of my chair and ran out of the theater, up past the soda machine and the divergent set of stairs going to the restrooms, and out into the lobby. I was in a panic. It took me several minutes to regain my composure and slip back down the aisle to our seats. As far as sitting, I stood in the aisle for the rest of the movie so I could run out of the theater as the level of terror ebbed and flowed, while the Femme family was reduced down to 1. It was great. Years later, when I was about 12, I got my first real kiss from a slightly older girl, a stranger. It truly was a wondrous, magical place.
Original music by Robert Crenshaw, Jamie Hoover, Don Jones, John Crenshaw, Don Dixon, and Marty Jones. Sound design and final editing by John Crenshaw. This has been a Treefort Records production. Y'all come back now. Here